Get into inhibitors. I'm actually going to let you talk about this, Steve. I will only say that we see this top data point pretty consistently lately.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, we do anywhere between 10 to 12 benchmark reports a year, and we have been doing that for about 17, 18 years now.
18, yeah.
We always ask retailers. There's a lot of value in understanding what the external challenges are, those, coming in from the outside world that retailers don't have a lot of choice in the matter. Where the rubber hits the road is when we start asking them, why haven't you done more about this? And this notion of, well, technologists haven't proved to me that there's ROI and why I should act now. For about the first 10 years of our company was always the number one issue. It was always an issue of no one's proven to us that there's ROI here, and that's why we've been happy to sit on our hands and not do much. Probably about 5 years or so ago, we started to see that that number one technology report or that number one inhibitor moved from, no one's really been able to prove the ROI to us because the technology community has done a really good job of presenting the ROI and the business case for a lot of these solutions. When we go out and talk to retailers, we often hear them say to us, we believe that a lot of these technologies could help us. The problem now is they don't know which one to choose. And the reason they don't know which one to choose is because they have too many different projects going on. They've allowed themselves, due to inactivity and due to a changing world, quite frankly, that's moved a lot quicker than most of us ever would have predicted, um, that there's just too many different projects that are in need of immediate attention. And so while this is interesting, in the context of the store, it's probably more interesting to think about as a reason for inactivity within retail across whatever subject we're studying. It's just there's too many projects going on, and retailers don't know how to prioritize them. And again, our partner Paula Rosenblum likes to say people only do things that they're paid for. In order for someone to become a champion behind one of these really large, really expensive undertakings, they have to believe that it is the exact right one now. Not just that it's going to work, but that in a sea of priorities, it is the exact right priority to tackle. And that's a risky maneuver, and it can cost people their jobs. Um, Part of why this is so interesting is because this pressure is only getting worse with time. Um, Sort of alluded to this in the previous slide, but this notion that stores, particularly stores, already have too much going on and they don't have the capacity to add more projects. You can see in 2018, that was just about a third of retailers were saying that. Now we're over a half. So this is not a trend that's going to get any easier. And the longer that stores delay the inevitable, and that is investing heavily in technology that makes consumers feel that this is not a tech-free zone and makes them feel like this is a place that I do need to still visit, and I can't just accomplish everything that I need to from a consumer and retailer point of view by sitting on my couch and ordering everything online, or sitting in my car and ordering everything from the parking lot, not even bothering to go into the store. Um, they're going to have to make some bold decisions here. Um, and that becomes very much a triage endeavor. So earlier, we looked at how winners viewed the landscape differently than average and underperformers. This is a perfect case to look at that. The same thing. What is keeping us from moving? Are we too busy, or are we waiting for direction? And those are two very different things. So I'd like to start at the end here by drawing your eye to the very last data point. Average and underperformers, who, as we noted earlier, are those who are just being beaten by year-over-year comparable same-channel sales, or not keeping pace with that, I should say, have a much bigger problem than retail winners do. They have a problem where their business leadership doesn't even understand the opportunities. Nearly half of retailers who fall into that average and underperforming category say that it's not just that no one understands what to do next, it's that the most important people don't understand how necessary this is or what the opportunities for improvement are. By way of comparison, the second data point down, winner's largest hurdle here is that stores already have too much going on and they just don't have that capacity to add more projects. Everyone is in agreement in the top data point that the technology changes too often. This is not going to slow. As we see the advent of more AI and generative AI technologies being folded into virtually everything coming from the technology community, it would be far too easy to sit and use this as an excuse for why inactivity is the right decision. It's not the right decision. The time for change is now. Again, we don't say that lightly, and we don't say that to be someone who just sort of sits in this ivory tower and chastises retailers. We're former retailers ourselves. We understand how difficult it is to orchestrate this change. But the fact of the matter is, for consumers, and we've touched into their viewpoint several times throughout this presentation already, when they walk into a store today, too often they feel that it looks and feels exactly like the store that they walked into 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and in the case of many grocers, 40 years ago. There's just not a lot of technology they're engaging with, and they're not happy with that. I'm not going to say they're fed up, but they're not happy with that. And they're going to reward the retailers who are able to prioritize these things and triage them in a way that folds bit by bit incremental change into that store experience. So when we ask, and if you at the end here, we'll have a link to the full report. There's a lot more data in the full report, specifically as it relates to retailers' perceptions of which technology is the most valuable to them and which technologies are the ones that they have a fighting chance of actually using and leveraging to their full capability. But one of the ones that we wanted to highlight here today, just in this sort of general overview, relates to store management themselves. If you've read our store report over the past 15, 20 years, you'll know that we talk a lot about the shifting role of the store manager and how important it is to utilize these technologies, if for nothing else, than to get the store manager out on the floor, to get them away from the task of yesteryear of just sorting out the schedule and figuring out who needs to shift, who needs to change their shift with who else. It's not what a store manager should be doing. These are highly trained. We actually have some data in the report about training and how store managers are not receiving enough training, or as much as retailers would like to give them, but they're still getting more than the average store floor associate. So they're still your best fighting chance of actually presenting a relevant face to the consumer, or at least being able to solve the problems that the associates are having so that they can in turn present a relevant source to inquisitive, if not somewhat angered consumers. But we ask retailers, what are the potentials of the following store management technologies? And this blue line here of high value, it's pretty high. It's pretty high across the board. And there's really no stone left unturned. Even at the very bottom of video surveillance and store level and profit and loss access, those are pretty high. So without asking, there won't be a quiz at the end of this, without asking anybody to sort of remember what the individual technologies were, it's worth noting that the value of all of these things is essentially in helping a store manager understand what's going on in these four walls, because that is the key to any next best action. First, we have to understand what's truly happening with employees. How are they moving? Are they able to complete their tasks in the way that we're presenting them to them? As it relates to POS exception-based reporting about products themselves, as it relates to onboarding and recruitment tools. The key to all of this is understanding what's going on. So a lot of value placed to pretty much every technology that we put in front of them. But, and this is the inverse side of that information, when we ask what is the status of the following store management facing technologies in store, we offered 5 different versions of this. A technology could be implemented and a retailer is happy with it. It could be implemented and they are unhappy with it, which shows up here in this chart. It could be a budgeted project for the next 12 to 18 months. And unlike some of our competitors, we have no interest in what retailers are talking about investing in 5 years from now. 12 to 18 months is the outside window. That's as far as we're willing to look because the world just changes too quickly. And then the last category would be, the last 2 categories that are not visioned here would be if they have absolutely no intention of doing anything about it, or if there are discussions in place, but there's no money allocated. So the 2 most interesting things that jump out in this chart are how many technologies that retailers have already implemented and they are dissatisfied with, and the ones that they haven't done anything about yet, but it's a budgeted project. We very rarely see data this wide in that band. If we go back a slide, you'll see just how high a value there are to a lot of these things. But when you jump forward and you see how many things within that exact same list, this is the exact same list of technologies, retailers have implemented and they're happy with, it's minimal. So there are a lot of dissatisfied customers. And this is part of the reason why we don't play, vendor comparison. We're not interested in the vendors, that are being favored or kicked to the curb here. What we're interested in is the technologies themselves. And if this is to be believed, and there's no reason for us to disbelieve it, because every year that we ask a question like this, when we come back the following year and ask, what are you happy with? We see these shifts where last year's implemented and planning a change categories move swiftly into the implemented and hopefully satisfied category. Um, and this is a further example of that from the customer facing capabilities. There's a lot of replacement coming. These are when we ask retailers to identify what are the most high value customer facing capabilities. These are the things retailers want to do most. They want to be able to offer the endless aisle and assisted selling that serves as a brass ring to so much of everything we've talked about here today. It's what enables a shopping visit to turn into more than just, I've walked into your store, I need to try to figure out the problem for myself. Maybe you have it in stock, maybe you don't, maybe there's someone to help me, maybe there's not. Maybe if I can track someone down, there'll be a value, maybe they won't be. This number one point, 58% of retailers say, if we were able to solve for the customer some of this endless aisle issue where we don't have everything in stock, but by having a valuable and relevant associate there with a technology in hand, they could assist that shopper to complete the sale. Maybe that's ordering from a different store. Maybe that's shipping directly to their door. Maybe it's telling them, we don't have that anymore, but here's something else that would be an appropriate replacement. That is what retailers want to do most, and that is going to require technology. And you can look down this list. Another long list of very valid, very reasonable technologies that retailers don't need convincing from the technology world work. They get it. They know there's ROI on these things, and they know that there's need for them. The question is, how are they going to prioritize them? And this is something that if you read the full report, we talk quite a bit about. So far, the trend has been that retailers have invested in the things that are easier to do. Not that they're more valuable, not that they line up with everything we just saw in that long laundry list of what's most valuable and what would make stores more relevant and give consumers a reason to want to get off the couch and come to stores again. But they have just tackled the things that are I hate the term low hanging fruit, but they are the least technically challenging to implement. And so Brian talked earlier about consumers and what matters most to them. These are the things that consumers say matter most to them. And pricing, very difficult. Personalized pricing is something that we've conducted myriad amount of research around and is not an easily achieved goal. But consumers don't need personalized pricing. What they just want is relevant pricing. They want to make sure that when they walk into a store, they don't feel like they're being ripped off. As consumers, most of us probably know there's been an awful lot of times we've been standing in front of something, having it at a store shelf, had it in our hand, and before we take it to the till, say, wait, I just want to look online and make sure that I'm not getting ripped off here. That's what matters most to consumers. But you can see this combination of where they agree and where they strongly agree of the red and blue lines. There's a whole host of things that are most important to them. And they're really frustrated with how hard it is to engage with a person when they have a customer service issue. We don't see retailers prioritizing those technologies the way they should. Another point of real contention for consumers is that brands that I love don't know enough about my shopping habits to identify me as one of their best consumers. That's a problem. If you spend your hard-earned money with a retailer that you consider to be one of your favorite retailers, and you've been doing it year in and year out, and you continually provide them with all kinds of information about who you are, where you live, how you like to shop, the products that you like to buy, and they can't even tell that you're one of their best consumers and you feel that they treat you the exact same as a sort of a carpet marketing campaign or a carpet pricing campaign or a carpet product campaign, that's going to lead to a great deal of frustration. And these last two data points are just kind of interesting, if nothing more. The consumers say they use a lot more technology to shop than retailers know what to do with. It's just confirmation of our overall theme here throughout. And that my favorite retailers don't know how to engage with me digitally. It's a continuation of the story Brian was talking about with his grocer, but the fact again that consumers use so much of this consumer grade technology in their life, and that they feel like these retailers are just a black hole in their life. a nameless, faceless entity that doesn't know anything about them, has very little interest in tailoring their assortment or their prices or their marketing or any of their messaging or any of their communications of any kind, and continues to hit them with offers for things that they don't shop for. It's a growing frustration out there. So again, we encourage everyone to download the full report and read it because there's a lot more insight there than we could offer here in just this overview today. But one of the things that we sort of challenge retailers with is the technology that you're saying you're going to invest in and that you've prioritized most. Is it really the right new tech? Is it really going to meet the demands of consumers in the way that they are so loudly and so clearly communicating that they want to be engaged with? And Brian, I don't know if there's any points here that you wanted to add as well.
No, this is all good. I think I just want to reiterate that a lot of this is being driven again by the consumer. Consumers adopt technologies faster than retailers do. And Steve, you mentioned that the earlier on that the question of the ROI never comes up because of the overall capital requirements and all that involves. One of the things I want to point out, and I think we talk about this a bit in our report, is that retailers are advantaged by the fact that the consumers already have invested in the technologies. They're carrying them with them. Employees have the technologies that they use in their daily lives. So it's really about making information accessible in real time and with a high degree of relevance to either the consumer or the employee, depending on which problem they're trying to solve at any particular time. And consumers do this, as I said, in their daily lives. We all do this. A typical example of that is a map that we use in our automobiles to find out the best way to get around a traffic jam. And consumers want to do the same kinds of things in the stores. If they're looking at a product on the sales floor, they want to be able to find out more information about that product simply by looking it up. And so in a way, consumers have taken the retailer halfway. The retailer just needs to meet them. That's what has to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And as it relates to the technology asset itself, again, a lot more detail in the full doc, but the three categories that we, focused in on most were what can help your store with store management tools, what can help your customers with customer facing tools, and the last category here is what about the ones that you provide to your floor level associates.
Mhm.
And there's a much longer discussion here around what are the right technologies, what is the right level of training, I mean, a few years ago we were talking about hardened retail devices. No one's talking about hardened retail devices anymore, right? We're talking about consumer grade technologies by and large in the hands of people who, at a time of historically low unemployment, quite frankly, have their choice of where they want to work. Here in this country, and we know it's a global phenomenon right now, there's not a lot of help in stores. There's help wanted signs hanging in most windows. I need to get away from the everys and always, but there's a lot of demand on the part of retailers to staff their stores with talented people, and as a result, part of what potential hires are looking at is, do you have technologies that are going to make my job when I'm standing there in front of a pissed off consumer easier?
Hmm.
Do you have, a corporate alignment with social issues that I really care about? Do you have a flexibility in your work schedule that makes me feel not like an indentured servant, but that I have some agency over my own life and my own work-life balance? These are things that retail associates would never have been associated with this particular job 20 years ago, but it's part of the new reality. So we ask retailers, when you think about the technologies that you're going to put in the hands of these people, what do you have? What do you value most? What are you planning on buying? And as you can see here, there's a really wide gap between where the highest value is placed and what retailers are actually using. So we know there's been a lot of data here, and again, there won't be a quiz, but the directional key to remember here is the gap between what is valued most and what is being used most is surprising at best. Not enough retailers are using self-managing scheduling tools, even though it's their number one most valued technology. Not enough are using mobile devices to serve as point of sale, even though virtually 6 out of 10 say it would be, wow, wouldn't that be great to have? So the takeaways here from a technology point of view, whether it's about the techs that are in the hands of associates or store managers or the ones that are facing consumers themselves, is retailers know what they've gotten themselves into. They recognize that technology is going to be a large part of the way they get themselves out of this problem. Um, and the real issue becomes, how do we prioritize what to do next? So if you've read our reports before, you know that we always end by making recommendations for retailers. And these are long. They're actually longer in the full document itself. Um, but the general gist is we don't like to make recommendations based on anything other than what that data has just shown us for that specific moment in time. So for us, these recommendations are based on where to be in Q2, Q3, 2024. Um, and as former retailers and as people who've had, decades long careers in this, we do feel that we've earned the right to color some of this with our experience and our opinions. And this is the one place where we allow that to happen. Everything you've seen up until now has been completely and totally objective. This is the first time we allow ourselves to sort of color what we think this data means for the industry. It's part of why the other half of our business model is to serve as advisors for both retailers and technologists alike. The data keeps us current. Our interpretation of it helps people get to better next best actions. But in short, there is some good news here, and we highly recommend that it be taken with a grain, not a grain of salt, but that it be taken at measure before moving on to the doom and gloom of, oh my gosh, what a pickle we've gotten ourselves into. There is some good news here. The fact that consumers have been as patient as they have, the fact that they still conduct as many, I think Brian said 83, 84% of sales here in the US are still, surprisingly, still concluded here in stores. That number goes down every year. So
Mhm.
it's not like there's an endless amount of time to play around with this, but um, there is a warning sign here. The fact that 88% of retailers think that consumers still love to browse stores and only 25% of shoppers really do is sort of the flip side of that. So the good news is it's not doom and gloom. The bad news is it could be if left unchecked. The next thing worth mentioning, and I have to move these cameras over to see this, is just to recognize how quickly change is occurring among shoppers. Um, that one of the earliest data points that we shared about um, consumer shopping behavior and how retailers think their least their 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 lowest concern is that consumer shopping behaviors have changed a lot in the 5 years. And we flip it around and we ask shoppers, they say, "Oh my gosh, the biggest thing that's changed in the last 5 years is the way I shop." It's a big deal, and stores simply cannot continue to exist as tech-free zones. People are not going to they're not going to accept it. They're just going to stop going sooner or later. They're not there yet, but we can envision a day where without significant infrastructure and prioritization change, that could become a reality. Um, and one of the ways to get there is to arm employees with tech to manage the degree that's happening there as well. I just talked about this significant shifts in the values and priorities of labor force that is available. Um, Retailers really have to rethink the way they hire, train, and retain good. Well, the technology asset can help them retain good employees. The technology asset can also help them hire new employees. But the real key to that tech could very well be in training employees to be more valuable for the time that they're there, whether they're there for 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years. Um, the consumers spoken pretty loudly. They need store associates to be more valuable. Um, Otherwise, they'll just solve their own problems. They'll just simply go into their own pocket or purse, take out their own mobile device, solve their own problem. And that doesn't help retailers in any capacity because it's just one step closer to the why did I come to this place in the first place model. Brian, do you want to jump in here and talk about returns because it's a big Jones of ours across a number of studies now.
Well, yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think I've said almost all that I can say about returns, and that's that returns are a reality in today's environment. That consumers have learned that they can have a lot of product delivered direct to their door. Consumers routinely do something called bracketing, which is when they buy, for example, the size of a product they think that is right for them, and the size down and the size up, and they return two out of the three of those things. That creates a lot of issues for retailers, of course, because it means that you have to commit three pieces of inventory to sell one of them. So that's just one problem. But the other problem is that once those other products are returned, they have to be handled appropriately. So there's a lot that can be done here. There was an excellent study that came out a couple of years ago that talked about the reasons that returns happen. And surprisingly, I think, as I recall, I don't have the data points in front of me, about 7 out of the 10 top reasons were within the control of the retailer. That bracketing thing was one of the other three. So things like misships or the color of a product on the website doesn't match the actual color of the product in the store. They get sizing issues, et
Guys,
cetera, et cetera. All of these things are things that retailers can deal with. It's a complex issue, but our general advice to retailers is the best way to deal with returns is to prevent them from happening in the first place. Now, to the extent that they will happen and the return is going to be walked back into the store, those processes need to be optimized so that retailers can minimize the costs associated with it. And finally, let's point out that returns do create an opportunity to build loyalty. There's a retailer in the United States called Nordstrom's, which is famous because years and years and years ago, they took a used tire in as a return at a Nordstrom store. It's an interesting story, but they took it. And that story lives on in legend, even though it is the details have become fuzzy. So loyalty can be built up with good handling of returns, and of course, loyalty can be destroyed in a moment just by challenging the consumer on a return. So all these things are important. They need to be taken into consideration.
yeah.
Now, one
Yeah.
of the things, go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead, Brian. By all means, by all means.
I was just going to jump onto the next one. We talked about this earlier, and I want to just reiterate it. Consumers do not see channels. They just see solutions. You either solve their problem for them or you don't. And so the notion of having completely separate experiences in the various channels is a non-starter for consumers. Retailers need to unify the selling environment that's equal parts digital and physical. If the store is a big component of it, that's great. That's what we recognize as the best practice. Stores are no longer an island of retail sitting out there in a big ocean. They're part of they're nodal to a total solution set that's being made available to consumers. The e-commerce site, the mobile capabilities, the call center, all of these play an important part. So consumers expect retailers to be able to see their experience no matter how they interact. And retailers need to get real about that. So I'll let you go to the next one about the
Yeah, the
technology.
last one is kind of a recap of where we were just from a data point of view, and that's
Mhm.
it's time to re-examine the tech you actually are investing in as a retailer. One of the things we didn't touch on is that the number one store tech investment to date so far is for Wi-Fi for customer access. I talked about going after low-hanging fruit. This is a perfect example of that. This is not what customers are clamoring for. Yes, Wi-Fi should be table stakes in your store at this point. The notion of we want to wrap our stores in tinfoil and prevent people from being able to access the internet because, gosh, they're going to go and look at our competitors. That is a days gone by. The truth is, endless aisle technologies are a lot harder to deploy, but they're the things where there's far greater perceived payoff. So it's time for retailers to align what they say is most important in their best chance to please consumers with where they're actually putting their hard-earned dollars. Um, because as we say, multiple times throughout this, the longer we delay investment in technologies where there really is value, the more you're just sort of conditioning customers to solve for their own problems. Um, Shoppers' demands are pretty straightforward. They're not being subtle about what they want. And we tell retailers they do well to align their investment with coming projects with this reality. Consumers are incredibly clear in their demands. And quite simply, they are not looking to allow stores to continue to operate as tech-free zones. So that's what we saw at this brief moment in time. We'll have another report that we'll be talking about with supply chain in a matter of a couple of weeks. But this one is available if you're interested in reading the full report, which is, I think, about 30, 35 pages. It's a sizable document. It doesn't leave a lot of stones unturned. Here is a link for it right here. Again, we want to thank our partners at IORMA. They've
Mhm.
been wonderful in helping us present this research in a myriad of geographies across the world, um, as well as the sponsor of this report, who is a company based here in the US called JumpMind. So with that, thank you very much. Brian, I don't know if you want to say goodbye to the folks at home.
Well, thank you very much for listening. We'll start where we ended, or we'll end where we started, excuse me, and that's that this is being driven by consumers. It's basically the advice that we leave you with is that the store needs to be a reflection of how people live. And as long as retailers maintain that, it people will continue to come to the stores. It just has to reflect how they live. And with that, we'll say thank you very much.
Take care, all.